The first thing Warden Cole Reyes noticed about the crater was the smell. Not sulfur, not scorched pine resin. Something else entirely, something that sat at the back of the throat like old copper and wet animal hide, and a third thing he had no name for, a thing his brain kept trying to file under wrong and couldn't stop returning to. He stood at the tree line with his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm and looked at the depression in the earth and thought, that did not fall. Whatever made that hole came down slow, came down careful, came down with intent. He'd been a wilderness ranger for 19 years. He knew what a meteorite impact looked like. The displaced soil fanned wrong. The grass at the rim was bent inward, not outward. Something had settled here. Something had landed. He keyed his radio. Static. He moved 2 steps closer and tried again. The display flickered and died. He tapped the unit against his palm. An old habit that had never once worked. And he did it anyway because the alternative was accepting that he was alone on a Tuesday morning in a forest that had gone absolutely silent. And the birds had not simply gone quiet, the way birds go quiet when a predator moves through. They had stopped mid-call, mid-note, like a tape cut with scissors. That kind of silence was not the absence of sound. It was sound's corpse. Cole moved around the crater's edge, eyes down, reading the ground. Pressed grass. Heel marks. No, not heel marks. Something with no heel at all, a thin channeled impression, like the tine of a garden fork dragged lightly through soil. 2 sets moving away toward the creek drainage. He followed them 30 meters before the hairs on his forearm stood up and his body made a decision before his mind finished the sentence. He turned around. They were behind him. 2 of them. Smaller than he'd expected from the tracks. Smaller than anything should be if it wanted to look the way they looked. His first thought, embarrassingly, was that they resembled the plush gray alien toys sold at the gas station 2 towns over. The kind with the disproportionate eyes and the spindly arms dangling at wrong angles. His second thought was that those toys did not have teeth like that. The mouths were lipless, hinged wide, and the teeth were not teeth so much as they were dense nested structures, like the inside of a mussel shell, only bone pale and still wet. He drew his sidearm. The nearer one tilted its enormous head. The movement was bird-like, precise, and communicated nothing remotely like fear. He got 1 shot off. It hit. It didn't matter. The last thing Cole Reyes registered before the dark came in from the edges was that they made a sound while they fed. A low, rhythmic clicking, almost methodical, like a man ticking through his grocery list in a quiet store. It was July 10th, 6:47 in the morning. Marcus Webb had been driving since 4 a.m. Because Denny Okafor refused to be behind the wheel before sunrise on principle, and Marcus had long since stopped arguing with Denny's principles, which were numerous and deeply felt and occasionally indistinguishable from superstitions. Denny was currently asleep in the passenger seat of Marcus's 1989 Mustang convertible with his feet on the dashboard and his jacket over his face and one arm trailing out the window, fingers dragging lightly in the rushing air. He looked profoundly comfortable. Marcus looked at him with the specific kind of envy, reserved for people who can sleep anywhere, and felt it like a small knife. The drive through Pennsylvania had been Marcus's idea. He was a photographer. He'd read about the flooding in Reber County. A dam failure. Homes peeled off their foundations. The floodplain looking like something from a war zone. And he'd wanted to document it before the cleanup crews finished, and the evidence disappeared under fresh concrete and federal grant money. Denny had agreed to come, because Denny's other option had been a weekend with his sister's new boyfriend, who owned 4 types of acoustic guitar and played all of them. Marcus turned off the highway onto Route 44 and watched the landscape change. The forest here was thick and old, second growth, mixed hardwood pressing close on both sides of the road, and he liked the way it made the car feel small, the way it reminded him that most of the world was not built for humans and never had been. He'd grown up in Baltimore, which had a way of making you forget this. The drive was good for him. The quiet was good for him. He didn't feel good. He felt something he couldn't name, a low-frequency unease that had been building for the last 20 minutes. He rolled his shoulders, told himself it was fatigue, and reached to turn on the radio. Every station was static. Denny. No response. Denny, wake up. Denny lifted one corner of his jacket and peered out with the baleful look of a man interrupted mid-rem. We there? Radio's dead. All of it. Denny lowered his jacket back over his face. Atmospheric interference. Mountains do that. These are hills. Atmospheric interference. Hills do that. Marcus turned the dial through the full sweep twice more. Nothing. He gave it up and drove insolence, and after another mile he saw the man in the road. He was moving wrong. Walking, technically, but with the specific shambling discoordination of someone whose body was communicating emergency signals that his brain hadn't processed yet. The kind of walk that precedes collapse. He was an older man, in fishing waders and a canvas hat. Both hands were pressed to his midsing in the way people press against wounds, and the fabric under his hands was dark. Marcus hit the brakes. The Mustang lurched to a stop on the gravel shoulder. He was out of the car before it fully settled, crossing the road in 3 long strides. And by the time he got to the man was already going down, and Marcus caught him, half caught him, took his weight on one shoulder, and lowered him to a controlled fall rather than a straight drop. "Hey, I got you. What happened? Can you tell me what happened?" The man's eyes found Marcus's face and held there with tremendous effort. His lips moved twice before sound came out. "Little men," he said. "What? Little men." The voice was barely a whisper, but there was something in it, not delirium, not confusion, conviction. In the woods. Little men came out of the woods. Denny had gotten out of the car and crossed to them. He looked at the man's hands, at the dark stain, and his face did something complicated. "Hospital," he said. "There's a clinic in Faro Crossing," the man said. "Dr. Watts." "Oh, okay," Marcus said. "We're going to get you there." "What's your name?" "Walter," the man said. And then his eyes went unfocused, and he was unconscious but still breathing, and Marcus got him into the back seat and drove. He didn't ask himself then what had done that to a man's midsection. He was focused on the driving, on finding the town, on the clean and actionable thing in front of him. Later, much later, he would understand that this was the last moment of his old life. The life in which his job was simply to bear witness, to document from a safe and considered distance, to show the damage without living inside it. He didn't know it then. He drove. Dr. Carla Bryce had worked alone in the Faro Crossing Clinic for 11 years, which meant she had seen most things. She had delivered babies under conditions she didn't like to describe at dinner parties. She had set a man's femur in a kitchen because the road to the hospital was washed out and the helicopter couldn't land. She had once talked a man out of dying through sheer force of argument. She took one look at Walter Hess being carried through her door by 2 strangers and began making decisions. Marcus and Denny put him on the exam table, and Carla cut away his shirt and looked at what was underneath, and kept her face neutral with considerable effort. She'd seen animal attacks. Bear, mostly. Occasionally coyote. Whatever had done this was not a bear, was not a coyote, and had not worked anything like a jaw. The pattern of damage was suggestive of something she couldn't name, couldn't file, couldn't categorize, and she was not a woman who liked leaving categories empty. She looked at the 2 strangers. Road trip clothes, day-old stubble, neither of them local. The taller one, the one with the camera bag still over his shoulder, was watching her with the specific intensity of someone who photographs disasters. She had seen that look before, knew it. Not callousness, but a particular kind of presence, an inability to look away. "You found him on the road?" "Route 44, about 2 miles out," Marcus said. "He said anything?" "He said little men." The clinic was quiet. Carla's stethoscope was cold against Walter's chest. His pulse was there, unsteady but there. "I need you 2 to wait in the hall," she said. The hall smelled of old linoleum and antiseptic, and the particular cold that medical buildings cultivate even in summer. Marcus sat in a plastic chair and looked at the wall. Denty sat across from him and looked at his phone, which had no signal, and turned it over in his hands several times as though signal might be hiding on the back. "You think it was an animal?" Denny asked. "I don't know. Hunters sometimes mistake each other for animals. There was no entry wound. It wasn't a gunshot." Denny turned his phone over again. "Some kind of farming equipment. Auger, maybe. Guy goes fishing, wanders near a property line. He said little men. People say things when they're in shock. He wasn't in shock when he said it. That was the clearest thing he said. He was looking right at me." Denny had no answer for this. The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere toward the back of the building, a door opened and closed. They decided to leave. Walter was in the doctor's hands. They'd done what they could. Marcus left his phone number on a scrap of paper with the clinic receptionist, a teenager who had come in looking alarmed and was trying very hard to look professional. And they went back to the Mustang. "We still doing the flood photos?" Denny asked. "I want to set up camp first, get some rest before the light's right." "Camp, in those woods. There are campgrounds, designated sites with fire rings. We'll be fine." "I'm just noting," Denny said carefully, "that we found a man with what appeared to be bite marks on his torso, on a road running alongside those woods, and you would like to sleep in those woods. I appreciate the note. I'm adding it to the official record." "Noted." They drove north on 44, windows down, late morning sun coming through in long flat columns through the tree line. Marcus didn't turn the radio on again. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful, just absent. He'd photograph the flood sites tomorrow. Tonight he'd get the tent up while there was still light, get the camp stove going, and not think about what the road had looked like around Walter Hess's feet, about the way the gravel had been disturbed, not just blood but a dragging mark, as if something small had been pulling at him, testing weight. He didn't think about that. He drove. They made camp in the late afternoon at a designated site near Kellner Creek, which was swollen from the flooding but still in its banks. Marcus had the tent up in 11 minutes. He had done it enough times that it had become muscle memory, his hands working while his mind was elsewhere. Denny built the fire with slightly too much ceremony and significantly too much newspaper, and the result was impressive but short-lived. And then they had a proper fire, and the smell of it was familiar and good. Marcus sat on his camp chair and looked at the tree line. It was the light, he told himself. Late afternoon light in a mixed hardwood forest was inherently atmospheric. The way it came in at a low angle and turned the understory amber, the way the shadows pooled between the trunks. It looked like something was standing in there if you let your eyes unfocus. He'd photographed enough forests to know this. The brain searched for faces, for figures. It was wiring, not warning, but the birds were quiet again. "You hear that?" Marcus said. Denny was scraping the bottom of a pot of instant noodles. "Hear what?" "Nothing. That's what I mean." It went quiet. Denny listened for a moment with the perfunctory attention of someone who believes the other person is being dramatic. Then he listened more carefully. Then he set the pot down. The forest had not gone gradually quiet the way it does when rain comes. It had gone quiet all at once, the way a power grid fails there. And then not. The frogs along the creek bank, the two species of warbler that had been active in the canopy for the last hour, the persistent chip note of whatever was foraging under the deadfall 20 meters to the east. All of it gone. Marcus was on his feet, his camera was up, old reflex, good reflex. He looked through the viewfinder and turned slowly. And, through the long telephoto, he swept the treeline and the creek bank and the open ground between the hardwoods. And then he stopped. There was something on the far bank of the creek, small, gray, perfectly, horrifyingly still. It was looking at them. He lowered the camera slowly. "Denny, I see it. How long has it been there?" "I don't know. Long enough." The shape on the far bank had not moved. It was perhaps 40 meters away in shadow, and Marcus's eyes kept trying to resolve it into something known, a rock, a stump, a trick of the failing light, and failing. It was approximately the height of a 10-year-old child. Its proportions were not the proportions of a child. Its head was too large. Its arms hung lower than arms should hang. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were dark and very wide and caught the last of the daylight in a way that living eyes didn't. Then it moved, not toward them, not away. It turned its head slowly to the right, paused, and made a sound. A low, rhythmic clicking, like a man ticking through a list. And the sound was answered from somewhere in the forest to Marcus's left and somewhere else to his right. "Get in the car," Marcus said. They got in the car. The Mustang did not start. Marcus turned the key 3 times with the precision of a man who understood that hurrying would not help and did it anyway. The engine turned but did not catch. He smelled something. Not oil, not anything mechanical. That same copper and wrongness from the road that morning, thin and pervasive. A scent that was also almost a sound. "The battery's fine," Denny said, looking at the dash. "All the lights are on, something else." "Get your bag," Marcus said. "Leave the tent." They got out of the car on the driver's side, away from the tree line, and walked fast toward the dirt road. Not running. Running was an announcement. Marcus kept the camera around his neck, and his eyes moving and his breathing even. And Denny moved beside him with his hands loose at his sides, in the way Marcus had come to recognize as Denny's version of controlled fear. He went loose rather than rigid, like a man preparing to absorb an impact. The clicking followed them, not close. Parallel. Something was moving through the forest to their left at a consistent distance, and it was not struggling with the terrain. It was not crashing through the underbrush the way a deer or a bear crashed. It was precise. It moved without announcing itself except for that clicking, which seemed communicative rather than accidental. Like it was reporting their position. They made the road. A mile north, they found a house. The Callaway property had been empty for 2 days before Marcus and Denny knocked on the door. They didn't know this yet. They knocked twice, and when no one answered. Marcus tried the handle and it opened, and they went in, Because the alternative was standing in the dark on a road in rural Pennsylvania while something clicked in the forest. The house was ordinary and terrible in equal measure. Ordinary in the lived-in way of old farmhouses. Water rings on the coffee table, a child's drawing on the refrigerator door, a pair of women's reading glasses on the arm of the couch. Terrible in what the living room told them, which Marcus documented with his camera in 3 frames before he made himself stop. Because documentation was how he kept from feeling the thing in his chest that wanted to be panic. And tonight he couldn't afford it. He could not let himself turn that into distance. This was not a flood-damaged site. This was a family. He set the camera down on the kitchen counter. Denny had found a sickle hanging in the mudroom, the old-fashioned kind, wooden handle dark with use, blade maintained. He stood there holding it with the awkward practicality of a man who had never held an agricultural tool in his life, but understood that the calculus had changed. "Okay," Denny said. "Yeah," Marcus said. They didn't sleep. They sat in the kitchen with the lights off because the lights were an advertisement. And they waited for morning, and Marcus thought about Walter Hess saying little men with that terrible clarity, and he thought of what he'd seen through the telephoto, and he thought about the clicking, and somewhere in the 4th hour of the dark, he asked himself the question he'd been postponing. Not, what are they? He knew what they were, in the way you can know something when the evidence has become undeniable, even if the knowledge is impossible. They were something that had come from elsewhere. They were something that ate. The question was, what are they afraid of? And the corollary, the one that began to structure everything after. What do we have that they don't expect? Because that was the thing he'd understood watching them through the camera. They'd been watching long before he spotted them. They'd been parallel to the road. They'd let the Mustang not start. And then, and this was the piece he kept returning to, they'd let Marcus and Denny walk away. Not couldn't. Let. They were testing something. Around 3 in the morning, Denny said, "The fisherman's hat." Marcus looked at him. His hat said, "Haven't had a bite all day, you see it?" I saw it. He'd been fishing for hours and caught nothing, and then he got bit. Denny was quiet for a moment. "I feel like that means something." "About what?" "About us. We've been sitting here for 6 hours and nothing's come through that door." Denny set the sickle on the table between them, blade away. "They know we're in here." "I know. So why haven't they come in?" Marcus didn't answer. He was watching the window above the kitchen sink, which looked out toward the barn. He had seen, twice in the last hour, a pale oval shape at the edge of the barn, there and then gone. Not moving in the way an animal moved. Something that understood concealment. Something that watched the way he watched, behind a lens, from a distance cataloging. "They're not hunting us," Marcus said. "Not yet. They're figuring us out." Denny picked up the sickle again. "Then we should do something surprising before they finish." At 4:17 in the morning, Denny went outside. This was against everything, Marcus said. Against every argument Marcus made in the quiet, urgent voice that was his version of shouting. Denny listened to all of it, and then he said, "They're going to come in anyway. I'd rather be the one who opens the door." He took the sickle. He left the mudroom light off. He went around the left side of the house, away from the barn, away from the angle that had been watched. And he moved the way he'd moved on the road, loose and quiet and low, and he circled the barn from the outside and came in through the back. Marcus stood in the kitchen and watched the front and waited, and his whole chest was a fist. He heard the sound from the barn, a short, sharp cry, not human, and then the clicking stopped. Then nothing for 2 full minutes. Then Denny walked back in through the mudroom door. Marcus looked at him. "It was looking through the window," Denny said. He was breathing hard and his hands were shaking, but his voice was level. "It was standing at the barn window looking at the house. I came up behind it." He paused. "It's smaller up close than it looked through your camera." "Are you?" "I'm fine." He set the sickle on the counter. His hands didn't stop shaking. "There was a moment where it turned around and I thought, it made this sound. I don't know how to describe it, like it was surprised." He looked at Marcus. "I don't think it expected that. I don't think it expected someone to come out after it." "No," Marcus said slowly. "I don't think it did." He went to the window. The clicking had not resumed. In the gray pre-dawn, the farm was quiet, but differently quiet. Not the dead quiet of the first hours, but something more like aftermath. Something had been moved on the board. "We need to get to the town," Marcus said. "We need to find anyone else who's still here." Faro Crossing in the early morning was a town trying to understand itself. Marcus had seen this before, After floods, after fires, the specific look of a community in the first hours of a disaster that is larger than its capacity to process. People standing on porches in the manner of people who have come outside because inside felt wrong, without a clear next step. A truck idling at the intersection of Main and Garner, with no one apparently deciding whether to go left or right. The gas station attendant standing in the parking lot looking at the sky. He and Denny had walked the 2 miles from the Callaway property in the gray light, and they were carrying two things between them: the sickle and the information that the creatures could be surprised, that they could be approached from an unexpected direction, that the specific quality that had made this farm survivable through the night was not firepower and not fortification, but the simple, deeply human's willingness of one man to go outside when every instinct argued against it. Dr. Carla Bryce was still in the clinic. She hadn't left. Marcus found out later that she'd spent the last 4 hours treating 2 more people who'd made it to her door. A teenage girl named Michelle with acid burns on one arm and something like shock in her eyes. And a man whose name Marcus never learned who hadn't survived. Carla had done what she could, and she was still standing, and her coat had blood on it, and she looked at Marcus and Denny in the doorway with an expression that was not relief exactly, but was in the same family as relief. "You're the men who brought Walter in," she said. "Yes. He didn't make it, I'm sorry." She crossed her arms. "Michelle killed 2 of them, with an aerosol can and a lighter." Marcus looked at Denny. Denny looked at Marcus. "That worked," Denny said. "Burned them, yes." Carla's voice was clinical, precise, the voice of a woman who processed by categorizing. "They bleed, they feel pain. They have some kind of acid. Michelle says it spat at her before she got to it. She lost some skin on her forearm, but she'll keep the arm." A pause. "They're not invulnerable." Nobody said they were invulnerable. "Nobody's been in a position to test it," Marcus said, "until now." She met his eyes. "How many did you see?" 2 near the campsite, 1 at the Callaway farm." "How many in town?" "At least 4, maybe more. The phone lines are down. The radio's dead. I don't know what's happening past the county line." She looked at the window. "Michelle says there was a ship. An actual ship, a large one, over the highway." Outside through the clinic window, the sky to the east had lightened to the flat gray of a morning that wasn't going to be a good one. And against that gray, against the tree line beyond the edge of town, Marcus could see shapes moving, more of them than he'd expected, coming in from the forest. "Then we stopped them here," he said. "With what?" Denny asked. He wasn't being argumentative. He was genuinely asking. The same open pragmatism he'd applied to the aerosol can, the same open pragmatism he'd applied to going out the back of the barn at 4 in the morning, and Marcus loved him for it. Genuinely, in that stripped-back moment. Because Denny's question was exactly the right one. "With what we have," Marcus said. "Which is what we always have." What they had was the following: 3 people with working hands and non-clouded minds. A clinic stocked with chemicals Marcus couldn't identify and Carla could. Denny's sickle. The aerosol trick Michelle had discovered. A camera that Marcus kept lifting and pointing at things, because documentation was alive in him even now, because bearing witness was the only version of usefulness he'd learned. And he was in the process of learning another. And the thing Marcus had understood in the kitchen before dawn, that the creatures were gathering information, that they were systematic, that they were operating on the assumption that their prey was passive. They'd been eating their way across the county for 14 hours. In that time, in every encounter, the humans had been reactive. They'd been caught, they'd been found, they'd been circled. They'd run or they'd died. The creatures had mapped a world of prey animals. They had not, as far as Marcus could tell, encountered anything that went looking for them first. He thought about his photographs, about flood sites, about standing in the middle of catastrophe with a camera raised, about the specific way his body felt when he chose to move toward the thing rather than away. He'd always called it professional detachment. He understood now it wasn't detachment at all. It was a choice, repeated enough times that it had become muscle memory. To go toward, to look directly, to not pretend the thing wasn't there. He raised the camera. Through the telephoto he counted 8 distinct shapes moving through the tree line at the town's edge. Their movement was, as it had been the night before, coordinated, not military precise, but systematic, overlapping. Responsive, they stopped, listened, moved again. They were looking for survivors. They were still cataloging. He lowered the camera. "They're using the same approach pattern they used at the campsite," he said. "They move through cover. They stop to listen. They triangulate. They're good at it." He looked at Carla. "What do you have in that supply room that burns?" 37 minutes later, with a plan that had been assembled from available materials in the manner of something built under emergency conditions, which is to say imperfect and real, they were ready. The plan relied on several things that were true about the creatures as Marcus understood them. They were curious, they were systematic, and their coordination, while impressive, was based on acoustic communication, the clicking. They were, in a meaningful way, talking to each other. They shared information, which meant that if you could disrupt the information, you could disrupt the coordination. And if you could disrupt the coordination, then three people with improvised incendiaries and the specific desperate inventiveness of people who are going to die if they don't improvise could do something that 8 individually superior predators could not. Not because humans were stronger, because they talked differently, because they planned while afraid, because Denny would walk out the back of a barn at 4 in the morning, and Marcus would step into the middle of a ruined town with a camera raised. And Michelle, 17 years old and down to one good arm, would look at an alien creature spitting acid at her and think, fire. The creatures came in at the angle Marcus had predicted. The leading two entered the open ground between the hardware store and the filling station at 6:22 in the morning, and Marcus was on the roof of the hardware store and watched them through the telephoto and felt the specific calm that had always come over him in those moments. A steadying, a flattening of the static. He lowered the camera. He raised his hand. Denny from the alley beside the filling station saw the signal and did his part. Carla from the clinic window did hers. Michelle from the roof of the diner across the street did the thing she'd already discovered worked. And this time she'd had time to prepare. It was not clean. It was not coordinated the way a military operation is coordinated. 2 of the creatures scattered in directions Marcus hadn't predicted, and he spent 40 terrible seconds on the hardware store roof watching one of them move toward the clinic while Carla was inside it, and he shouted something he couldn't later remember. And Denny came out of the alley and met it in the street, and the 2 of them were 30 feet apart, and the creature stood between them and made the clicking sound. And it came out differently, shorter. Rising, a call Marcus had not heard before. An alarm. And that was the moment, because the clicking was communication, and communication can be wrong. The alarm brought the remaining creatures in from the tree line quickly, and it brought them into the open ground at the center of town. And it brought them into the space between the hardware store and the filling station and the clinic and the diner, where 4 humans who had spent the last half hour preparing the ground were waiting. Not all of them died, some fled. The ship, which they saw briefly, rising through the tree line at 6:44 in the morning, a shape that Marcus caught 3 frames of, and whose geometry he would spend years trying to describe accurately, took several of them. But several did not go with it. And when the ship was gone, and the creatures on the ground were gone, and the town was quiet, a different quiet, an earned quiet, the quiet of something genuinely over. Marcus sat on the hardware store roof with his camera in his lap and listened to it. The birds had not come back yet. The creek was audible from here, swollen and constant. The sun was fully up. Denny climbed the ladder and sat beside him. They were quiet for a while. "They're going to come back," Denny said. "More of them, probably. We should get the phone lines working. Tell people what we found out." Marcus thought about this. What they'd found out. Not technology, not weapons. The specific thing that had mattered, not the aerosol cans, not the clinic chemicals, though those had mattered practically. The thing underneath it. The going outside. The going toward. "Yeah," he said. He raised the camera. He looked through the viewfinder at the tree line, which was just trees now, which was just a forest full of birds that had not come back yet. And he documented it the way he documented all of it. The flood sites, the aftermath, the damage that told you something had happened here. Because you couldn't move past the thing you hadn't looked at directly. Because the evidence disappeared under concrete and federal grant money and collective forgetting if you let it. He documented it. Below them in the street, Carla was already on her feet, already moving toward the clinic, already cataloging, already preparing for whoever would come through that door next. Michelle sat on the diner steps with her burned arm cradled against her chest, and her eyes on the sky with an expression Marcus recognized. He'd seen it before, on people who'd stood in the middle of disasters, and made it out, and were now made differently by the making. Not the expression of someone waiting to be saved. The expression of someone who was done waiting. He took one more frame of the tree line. The morning light was coming through it now, long and amber, turning the understory gold, and somewhere in the canopy a single warbler found its note again and held it. "Come on," Denny said. "Let's get the phones." They climbed down the ladder. They had work to do. The report Marcus filed, through a county emergency system that was still half operational, through a journalist contact at a state paper who believed him on the third phone call, through a series of photographs that were, by every technical measure, among the clearest documentary evidence ever produced of non-human intelligence on Earth, ran to 47 pages. The executive summary, which was later read into the congressional record and which Marcus composed himself, was considerably shorter. It said, "They came here to feed. They are not invulnerable. They did not anticipate resistance. They do not understand that we go toward the thing that frightens us, and we plan while frightened, and we find uses for what's available, and we do not stop finding them. They catalogued our fear and mistook it for our ceiling. It was not our ceiling. It never has been." The warbler was still singing when Marcus walked through the door of the Faro Crossing Clinic and picked up a phone and started making calls. Outside, the July morning was coming in hard and gold, and the forest was full of birds again, all of them at once, as if they'd been saving it up.